Hello and welcome to the session on factors adversely affecting education of women. Education of women is an important aspect for boosting the social and economic development of the country. Promotion of girls' education, particularly at elementary level, is to bring certain benefits for the society in the form of social development and reconstruction. Promotion of girls' education needs to be in the form of content and quality of schooling, teachers, materials, enrollments, retentions, acquisition of basic literacy and numerical skills. The purpose behind it was to bring social development across variety of sectors, increasing economic productivity, political participation, health and sanitation, delayed marriage and making effective investment for future generation. Though there are many other possible ways and methods to achieve this national goal, education of girls is an effective way which has simultaneous impact on all aspects. Promoting girls' education has been a priority in India for over a century, but discrepancies still persist in learning opportunities. Significantly, India is the second largest educational system in the world after China, with a total enrollment of 114.6 million at primary level and 41.3 million at upper primary levels, out of which 47.52 million and 18.72 million are girls at primary and upper primary levels respectively. As per the Constitutional Amendment Act 2002, elementary education is a fundamental right of all the children in the age group of 6 to 14 years. As one of the major goals of SSA is to promote social justice, all gender and social category gaps were removed at primary level by 2007 and at elementary level by 2010. Still, universalization of elementary education in its totality is an elusive goal. Even now, the education of girls is lagging behind than boys at all levels of school education. This is a fact we can't ignore, that their enrollment rate is low and dropout rate is higher than boys at all levels of education. Many girls leave schools even without completing elementary education. Education in public schools for rural poor girls and women is largely limited to acquiring literacy and numeracy. The second category of superior schools, mostly in urban areas, is not within the reach of the poor. Only limited learning opportunities in rural public schools are left for girls from poor and deprived families. The focus on access has brought many girls into school, but assuring quality remains an ever debated issue. Deprived children, including large numbers of girls, are offered a quality compromised free education through what is formally known as transitional school. Competing and consecutive political ideologies have all resulted in more education and progress towards education for all (EFA), but of low quality, where the poor and deprived, particularly girls, suffer the most. There are many socio-cultural, economic and educational barriers which hinder their participation in education. Some of these barriers are discussed below. Barriers to women's education. Geographical. The considerable spatial disparity and in some cases incompleteness of institutional provision even at primary level relates directly to difficulties of physical access which adversely affect girls more than boys. Patterns of transportation and migration affect educational provision and take-up, again normally disadvantaging females, and in some cases extreme physical difficulties such as flooding and other hazards act in the same way. The influence of this factor can only be overcome by more sophisticated and multivariate spatial analysis of educational needs and the planning and implementation of integrated development projects as a result. Socio-cultural. A major deterrent to female take-up and follow-through of educational opportunities, even when these are available, is a near universal fundamental cultural bias in favor of males. The widespread operation of patriarchal system of social organization, of customary early marriage, of the incidence of early pregnancy in and out of marriage, of heavier domestic and subsistence duties of females, especially in rural areas, a generally lower regard for the value of female life, all combined through differentially in each case to adversely affect the participation of girls and women in formal education. To this list may be added problems of seclusion and security in some areas. Such long-standing constraints result in a dearth of female role models that could challenge the traditional one that is clearly acquired by both sexes at a very early age. The influence of this factor can only be overcome inter alia by a profound change of attitude on the part of influential males and traditionally minded powerful females in key family positions. Health. In general, the effect of poverty and malnutrition on the health of school-age children falls harder on girls than boys. Boys may get preferential feeding, while girls who have a heavier domestic workload are more likely to be undernourished. Even if they get to school, this adversely affects their performance and therefore retention rate. Health problems associated with the pregnancy, especially for adolescent girls, obviously have a negative effect, as do rising trends of sexual activity in the younger generations where these occur. Problems associated with the family size and family planning is widespread in relation to possible participation in education and implies the need for sex or health education at school level. It is clear that the health factor, though partly hidden and indirect in effect, is a very significant one in respect of the quality of young female participation in education as well as the quantity of it. Economic. Together with the fundamental socio-cultural bias in favor of males, the economic factor, especially in terms of grinding poverty and hunger, is probably the most influential in adversely affecting female participation in education, especially in rural areas. In such harsh economic circumstances, both direct and hidden costs to a family of sending daughters to school are perceived by parents to be prohibitive in terms of the provision of books, paper and uniforms or clothing important for social reasons, as well as the loss of vital help at home and on the land. In their condition, they consider sending daughters to school as a luxury which they can't afford. Because of the patriarchal predominance, investment in the girls' schooling is considered as a waste, since it benefits the family into which a girl marries rather than her own. In the more privileged classes, investment in the education of females may be an advantage in marrying well. This further increases the urban or rural gap. Vocational education, which might relate to employment prospects, is everywhere weak and undervalued, but especially so in respect of the interest of girls. Religious. The reality is that if the family is more religious, there is a tendency that they would stick to all religious norms blindly. Unfortunately, in India, some religious communities follow the practice of child marriage. This adversely affects the education of girl child, especially example girls in Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, Orissa, etc. Many customs and cultural practices like that hinder education of girls. For example, many parents of a certain community do not send their daughters to schools when they attain puberty. Legal. This factor acts mainly indirectly. Most countries have now legislated for equal status in respect of sex, but this is usually a recent innovation and traditional sanctions often still operate unchallenged. In many rural areas, long-standing societal rules constraining females are still operative, as is the case with condemning early marriage. The acquisition of minimum legal knowledge and support in such areas as gaining justice and compensation for assault, understanding letters and contracts, arguing for educational provision according to the law, and challenging disadvantageous pressures in respect of marriage, divorce and inheritance could be very helpful to the female cause. The encouragement and support for more females to seek and develop careers in various areas of this profession could be a very significant development in respect of female participation in education. Political or administrative. Although policies exist in most cases for such developments as universal primary education, equal educational opportunities in terms of gender and the eradication of gender bias from text and other materials, the political will to carry these through seems to be weak in the face of severe economic constraint. The creation of ministries or Bureau of Women's Affairs appears to be counterproductive, and the poor quality of local administrative or advisory staff and resources renders such government initiatives as do occur relatively ineffective. In some cases, where strong political dichotomies or other such disparities exist, even elite females may be disadvantaged by being in the wrong camp, and their potential contribution to national development and the role of females in general to that end may be lost. Language policies can adversely affect female participation in that where vernaculars have no status and schooling is either absent or very poor, women and girls remain trapped. As with the churches, political leaders are almost always male, and until considerably more women break into the most influential echelons of power, the question of low female participation in education and its implications for national development may well remain on the sidelines. Educational. This factor itself can be a deterrent to female participation in schooling. Difficulties of accessibility, lack of resources and low teacher quality and morale are widespread. In particular, the lack of female primary teachers in rural areas is a real problem. The organization of schooling in terms of the daily and seasonal imperatives of local economies usually renders it dysfunctional, and the curriculum is often unattractive in instrumental terms. At secondary level, in addition to the lack of accessible places, problems of cost, direct and hidden, are acute, and there is a considerable need for more single-sex girls' schools, some with secure boarding facilities and scholarship schemes to enable participation. Vocational education is weak, and schemes open to girls in this field are particularly useful. There is still a widespread problem of gender bias in books and materials. Suggestive measures. A large number of recommendations have been made and measures suggested for bridging the wide gap between the educational development of boys and girls by various well-known committees and commissions set up in the country from time to time. The wide gap between the educational development of boys and girls can be narrowed by improving the rates of girls' enrollment and their retention, and by adopting the following measures in a big way as a package deal. Some of these measures are already in work in some states in a partial way or on a pilot basis, but the adoption of these measures partially or on pilot basis has not made any visible impact on this problem. Therefore, the following measures are suggested to be adopted in totality and uniformly in a big way. Support should be given to NGOs involved in non-formal primary education projects which positively discriminate in favor of the participation of girls. Schemes should be brought for the enhancement of female participation in schooling, especially in rural areas, be part of an integrated and coordinated development including such other aspects as health, environment and economy. Projects should be developed and supported which address preschool childcare needs and adult literacy or skills development needs in an integrated and coordinated way. Aid should be considered for the provision of books, other learning materials, uniforms or other necessary clothing and fees to enable more girls to participate in schooling at both primary and secondary levels. Support should be given to the construction of more single-sex schools for girls with adequate residential facilities for pupils and female teachers in those locations where this is necessary for either environmental or social or cultural reasons. Aid should be provided for more scholarships to enable girls from poorer economic backgrounds to attend secondary school, whether boarding or otherwise. NGOs should be encouraged to submit schemes for aid approval that would have the effect of improving the rate of progression of girls from primary to secondary schooling. Support should be given to projects designed to eliminate gender bias from textbooks and other learning materials, especially at primary and secondary level, but also in respect of teacher education and training. Funding should be considered for improvements in the provision of teacher education and training, especially for primary school work that would encourage greater female participation and include more residential accommodation for female students. Aid should be considered for the upgrading of technical and vocational education for both sexes, partly though not exclusively, as a second chance opportunity of dropouts from the formal system. In some cases, this could be part of a community-based skills development program. Efforts should be supported to raise the level of male awareness of the community and family economic benefits likely to arise from increased participation of women and girls in educational and income generating activities. Aid should be considered for credible women's movements with track records of support for aspects of education and training, both formal and non-formal. Support should be given to the upgrading of traditional or subsistence agricultural practices, especially where those involve women and girls to a significant extent. Support should be considered for feeding schemes in primary and secondary schools, where such a facility might encourage and enable the poorest families to send their boys and girls to school. Aid should be provided to improve the level of educational policy implementation at the local level through the training of significant numbers of personnel in systems of implementation and delivery. Their role would be a practical one of animation, advice and support rather than mere administration. The opportunity should be taken to include a considerable number of women in such programs of training and subsequent employment. Assistance should be provided to enable the school day and the school year to be adjusted to the realities of rural life and the demands of rural economies on child labor. Aid should be given for resolving the urgent and particular problem of the security of female teachers, especially in rural areas, by providing adequate accommodation and protection. Why is women's education important? It is the reality that not only do education benefit the person learning, but also the community in which they live. Education contributes to the economic stability of any given nation by increasing the income of the poor. Research has shown that no country has sustained consistent economic growth without a significant nationwide literacy rate. In addition to economic stability, education promotes civil and international peace as well as cultural tolerance and understanding. The benefits of girls' education include economic productivity, social development, intergenerational education, social equity, sustainability of development effort. So, there is a general perception today that the education of girls and women is one of the wisest and most profitable investments in social and economic terms. The first person to benefit from education is the woman or girl herself as an individual and as a member of society. But the positive effects are felt also by her family, the community, society and the whole country. Let us take a look into how an educated girl contributes to the development of a country. The girl as an individual. Education leads to greater self-esteem and self-confidence and opens up new horizons for girls, enabling them to discover their own potential, to develop themselves fully and increase their resistance to gender discrimination. The family. Education helps girls and women to have a positive impact on their families, better childcare, vaccination, schooling, etc., better nutrition, decrease in child mortality, better communication with the children and other family members. When women's education is combined with an improvement in their status, they account for over 50% of the reduction of child malnutrition. An educated woman is better equipped to increase family income and resolve family problems satisfactorily. Her family's well-being thus gets a big boost. The community and society. Education heightens women's awareness of the important role they can play in the community and society to find solutions to problems that impede development and social stability. Survival rates, schooling and community productivity increase as a result of women's education with a corresponding decrease in mother and infant mortality rates. The community and society thus become more prosperous. The nation. With the awareness of her role as citizen, an educated woman can play a more dynamic role in addressing the economic challenges faced by her country in the areas of agricultural production, food self-sufficiency, the fight against environmental degradation, the use and conservation of water and energy. Women's education alone is obviously not enough to solve the country's problems, but it remains an essential factor in any development activity. Let me summarize the session. This particular unit discusses the issues adversely affecting women's education in India. The first module is an introduction which mentions about the present situation of women's education in India. It is the second module which elaborately describes all the factors which adversely affecting the women's education. And the third module puts some recommendations to overcome the discussed barriers to women's education. Finally, the fourth module gives stress to the point that why women's education is so important. The module brings out the many reasons for giving women proper education and makes clear that why it is so essential. Now, you can try to attempt the following questions. What is meant by economic barrier to women's education? How health becomes a barrier to the participation of women in education? What are the benefits of women's education in general? How an educated woman contributes to a nation as a citizen? Write an essay on the factors adversely affecting the women's education. Explain some of the suggestions for overcoming the barriers. Now, you can refer the books for further reading. Women's Education in Developing Countries, Barriers, Benefits and Policies by Elizabeth M., King M. and Annie H. 1988, World Bank Publications. School Education in Rural India by Prakash V. 1993, Mittal Publications, New Delhi. A Program for Universal Elementary Education, Framework for Implementation, a report of Department of Elementary Education and Literacy, MHRD 2005. Second Historical Survey of Women's Education in India 1988 to 1994 by Agarwal SP and Agarwal JC 1991, Concept Publishing Company. Hope that you have enjoyed this session. We can meet again with another topic. Thank you.